On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Foundation for the Carolinas, inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
Go ahead, hit record. He's just a petty hustler, an easy target, a repeat offender we recognize to get some more tax dollars. Wait. Over his weight limit, so we had to wrestle him down to the ground, cause taking down black bucks gets the heart pumping and the day started like a cup of joe. After bowels move, them boys in blue like it foul and dark, shedding light on the best part of waking up is black bodies filling this cup till it runneth over. Drink it in, but keep checking. Surround him. Cover up any mistakes as we continue to wait.
Quentin Talley, or Q, is a poet, actor, writer, director, producer, and musician. He is founder and artistic director of OnQ Performing Arts. OnQ launched in 2006 with a mission to produce classic, contemporary, and original performance works that reflect the Black experience. As a poet, Q has performed throughout the country, sharing the stage with Nikki Giovanni, Amiri Baraka, MC Lyte, Sonia Sanchez, and Tavis Smiley. As an actor, he has worked professionally with Actors Theatre of Charlotte, Winston Salem Arts Council, and New River Dramatist. His directing credits include Rise for Freedom, Dutchman, In the Blood, Day of Absence, Rhyme Deferred, and Miles and Coltrane Blue. Q is the lead singer of Quentin Talley and the Soul Providers, a blues, funk, and soul band. In this episode, we explore being unapologetically human, expressing the Black experience, issues that inspire his work, and when he is most free. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Q, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Q, when you meet someone and they ask you what you do, what do you say?
That is the age-old question I always get. And I always tell people I do multiple things. I'm a creative. And then I kind of break down of all the things that I've done over the course of my creative life. Started as a theater kid, always been a theater kid. So that's, my first love. But like in theater and the arts, everything kind of intertwined. So done poetry, spoken word artist. Like I said, I went to college for theater performance. So acting, when I was in college, I got the directing bug. And on top of that, ended up getting producer bug because I realized I had to produce the work that I wanted to do. And then I've always been a singer on a choir or something like that. So always been in love with music, but hate musicals. And, it kind of spreads from there, being a host for shows, MC for shows. I've done creative consultant work for corporate entities, done writing for corporate entities. So it really just spans the spectrum.
Well, Q, you mentioned a lot of things.
Yeah.
Poet, spoken word performer, playwright.
I wouldn't call myself a playwright. That's one category I do not put myself in because I'm not a playwright. Yeah.
Actor,
yeah,
director, producer, and singer. Is there something in common for you across all those expressions of art?
I just think I've always been an expressive person and found that theater and the arts, just in general, are a great way to connect people and break down barriers. And the conversations that you have are different when it's expressed within a safe space, quote unquote. So you're able to engage the audience in a different way and have conversations you wouldn't normally have.
I found an artist statement of yours, and I was wondering if you might read it.
Yeah. I would like to create and support works that are innovative, bold in approach, and unapologetically human in perspective. I would like to sustain stories that communicate the Black experience with the utmost respect, integrity, and love of cultural context. Our stories are too rich, too diverse, and too complex to be misused, misguided, and misappropriated. Therefore, above all else, be as authentic as possible, never taking for granted that creativity is a blessing, being on stage is a privilege, and our craft is a responsibility worthy of virtue.
Do you see that as your mission?
Yeah, as my personal mission. Being in the arts all my life, I've always wanted to tell stories from my perspective as a Black man in America. So that has always been number one goal for me. And just talk about the human experience just from my perspective. I don't think it's done enough, so that's where I was coming from. Yeah.
Well, I want to pick up on those two threads that you just mentioned.
Sure.
You said unapologetically human in perspective. What do you mean by that?
Humans, we are complicated people. Just showing the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs, trials and tribulations, the joys, everything that comes with being a human. And especially from my perspective as a Black person in this human skin, I feel like sometimes we're not allowed to be that. So that's where I meant as unapologetically human.
Let's talk more about that, because in that statement you said sustaining the stories of the Black experience.
Yes. Well, there's a rich history in America, in the world, but specifically in America, of Black folk in the arts and pushing boundaries in the arts. I dare say you wouldn't have any genre of American music without Black people. It just wouldn't exist. So we've kind of been the trendsetters and cultural keepers, but have not always gotten the credit for that. Or have been centered in the story in America. So, that's been my goal, is to kind of, especially for the theater company specifically, is to center African Americans within the American theater.
The company you're referring to is OnQ Productions.
Yes, OnQ Productions, yes.
Tell me about OnQ Productions, not only its work, but more about what it's seeking to do in the community.
So OnQ Productions is started in 2006 with a mission to produce classic, contemporary, and original performance works that reflect the Black experience. So that's the official spiel, if anybody asks. And it's been challenging and rewarding work here in Charlotte. We started out real small, and we're still a small company. Got a residency at Blumenthal, I think it was 2009, I believe it was. And we've been there ever since. And, the work is, like I said, centered around Black playwrights specifically in the work that they create. So we produce classic work like Amiri Baraka's The Dutchman, or Intizaki's Shangays, For Color Girls, and more contemporary stuff like August Wilson and Suzanne Laurie Parks. And then I also thought it was very, very important, and being a writer myself, is producing new works. So we've done, our signature work is Miles and Coltrane, and that was written by poets here in Charlotte. And we've done works by playwright Stacey Rose. She's in Playwrights Fellow in Minnesota now. So we have great writers here that's work is not getting produced, but are great, in my opinion, Broadway caliber, off Broadway caliber, that just don't get produced.
You mentioned Miles and Coltrane.
Yes.
What is that show about?
So Miles and Coltrane, when it originally started, like I said, it was an idea that literally came from a conversation. We had a poetry spot, the Wind Up, which is off of North Davison Street, which is now Salute. Like I said, it started from a conversation. Steps of the Wind Up off North Davison. That was our regular Thursday night poetry spot. And me and another musician, because we always had poetry and music together, a musician by the name of Corey McClure. We were sitting down. We randomly talking about life and all that good jazz and art. He said, has there ever been a show about Miles Davis or John Coltrane? And I thought about it and I was like, you know what? Out of all the theater that I know, I don't know anything about those two specifically. The only thing, that jumped out I knew of was Mad at Miles by Pearl Clegg. But other than that, that's the only show that I knew of. But no show that, you have shows about everybody from, all these biographies, from Hamilton to Billie Holiday, Nina Simone. You have all these folks and there's never been a show about Miles Davis and John Coltrane. So I was like, you know what, let's write one. So got together with Concrete Generation, my brothers and sisters in poetry, and I went to them and basically just kind of gave them a template of what we wanted to talk about. So Norris Guest, he was a big Miles fan, so he wrote all the Miles monologues. C.P. Mays, he wrote all of the John Coltrane monologues. Phil Moore wrote a letter to Miles from John Coltrane's perspective. Mecca, she wrote about Alice Coltrane from Alice Coltrane's perspective. So we went on. So it was over the course of 2 years, and we developed it. And I needed more stuff, so I went back to the poets and, got more stuff together. But our goal was to not have it talk about Miles and Coltrane kind of verbatim, because it'll be a 3-hour show. You never get out of the theater. Their stories alone, you could tell it all day. So we kind of came from it, once again, from that kind of human perspective of us being artists and what it means to be artists and create. So that's kind of the overall theme of the show. And we got some bad musicians in town. So hit up Stephen Gordon. He's now in New Orleans. So we have all these great jazz cats in town. A lot of them played the show over the past couple years. But like I said, Stephen Gordon is our MD. We fused all of the work together. And it really kind of showed what we were doing on a normal basis every Thursday at the Wind Up or, whatever poetry spot we may be in, but just put it in a theater context under lights. And
the show is very raw and visceral and emotional when it talks about sort of the addictions and the depression, the creative process, the connection to God that these cats are going through. How do you get there emotionally, both in the writing of the work and in the performing of the work?
In the writing of the work, I think that's very easy because, like I said, we tried to come at it from an artist standpoint. Being an artist is full of ups and downs, so that was real easy to connect with. As an actor, it's an interesting place to be in, especially with the whole addiction part. I've never done heroin, never will. But unfortunately, I've smoked a cigarette or two. And if you're jonesing for a cigarette or want a cigarette, I was kind of equating that to, which I know is nowhere near, withdrawing from heroin. But, kind of took that in and, put it in the performance. and other than the addiction, found similarities as playing John Coltrane, having a relationship with God and how he was raised. And I was kind of raised similarly in a small town, and, just having those similarities between John Coltrane and myself, helped flesh out the character for me. Yeah.
You played John on stage.
Yes, I did.
Did you identify more with John than with Miles?
I identify with both, but I do identify more with John than Miles. I say 75% of the time I identify more with Coltrane. Yeah.
His masterpiece is Love Supreme.
Mm-hmm.
In channeling him, is there a Love Supreme in you?
Oh man, that's a great question. I have to think about that one. We might have to come back to that question. That was a good one. I guess that one specific Love Supreme, I'll say this. I identify with John Coltrane so much because of his love of the craft. When you really study John Coltrane and look at his life's work and, how meticulous he was and the hours that he studied and just the reverence he gave to the craft of music in general, I think that's my Love Supreme is the work, the act of doing the work. And whether you mess it up or whether it's the greatest thing on earth, it's the act of doing the work and learning through the work. Yeah. So that would be my Love Supreme. Yeah.
So much of that show is powerful, and I think speaks to anyone who's involved in artistic work. And especially with Coltrane, there's this devotional practice where he is almost in prayer with God when he is playing the horn. Do you ever feel that way?
Yes, I do. I always tell people, you'll never get closer to God than being an entrepreneur. Because you will be praying. Yeah. But just in general, being an artist, you feel like you have I hope everybody feels like they have a higher calling and a higher purpose, and just trying to figure out what that is, And as an artist, you're always doing that as an individual and in the work that you're doing. So sometimes it's two separate things, and sometimes they intertwine together. So
creatives have moments of flow.
Yeah.
When they completely lose track of time and all of who they are is being expressed in what they're doing. Is there a moment that you can remember when you most felt in flow as a creative person?
Ooh. There are lots of moments, but it's just according to what I'm doing. I guess I feel most free and flowing when I'm working with a band. That kind of opens me up to kind of explore along with them, where we're going in the music and the whole tone of everything. And that's when I feel, I guess, most free and flowing is when I'm doing music.
Quentin Talley and the Soul Providers.
Yes. So over the years, like I said, I've always worked with musicians. They will always be at the poetry spot and once I started knowing musicians and going to their gigs, meeting other musicians, I've always wanted to put a band together, and it took me a decade officially. So Quentin Talley and the Soul Providers is a mix of musicians that I know and have worked with over the years. So, you might see somebody on guitar one day, or you might see somebody on bass the next day. But it's a core group of musicians that I've always worked with. And, we've started recording and working on projects and like Intergalactic Soul, and we did Boom Festival back in April. So just trying to solidify that as a actual thing and quit being so scared to do it. So, yeah.
And the music is jazz, funk, and soul.
Yep. All of my favorites. Yep.
If there's an encore, if there's a song that you're going to bring home at the end, what song is it?
Ooh, it's according to the crowd and where I'm at and the whole vibe. But if there's an encore, we did Rock Steady by Aretha Franklin. Yeah. Because that song is just funky. So, with Aretha's passing, I was just like, man, have that on deck. Because we had it in the set list anyway. So I was like, we gotta pull this one out the hat.
What are some of the songs on the set list?
We got everything from Black Hole Sun from Soundgarden to Running Away by Sly and the Family Stone, Bad Boy Party by Luther Vandross. I have some originals, poetry work that I've done and original songs that I've done. So it really it spans the spectrum of kind of rock, soul, and funk. Yeah.
Q, one of the musical shows you did was Intergalactic Soul.
Mm-hmm.
That brought science fiction and social awareness together.
Mm-hmm.
How did it do that?
This came about by everything in my life is a conversation. So I've been friends with Marcus Kaiser for years. And Marcus is a visual artist here in town, graphic designer. And, he was posting on Facebook and Instagram some work that he was doing. And I was like, man, I hit him up and I was like, this is so dope. I don't know what y'all are doing, but I want to be a part. I was like, can we meet? It's him and his brother Jason Woodbury. And I didn't know Jason at the time, but we all met. And I was like, man, this work is so, so dope. I just want to be a part. And I was like, even if I'm not a part, I don't know how I can be a part of the show. But even if I can't be a part of the show, just let me help, a market or whatever. Because I just thought the work was out of this world, literally. We got together, and once I realized that it was kind of they had characters and Astro and Pluto and The Last Black Starfighter, all these storylines. It was kind of comic book form. I was like, it'd be dope to, bring these characters to life and have a narrative for the show. Because the visual art already has a natural narrative. But I was like, it'd be real cool to, bring it to life with music. So they was like, yeah, let's do it. So we ended up doing they ended up getting the exhibition at the Gantt Center. I think this was like 3 or 4 years ago. And I did the first performance, and it really took off. People were really, really into the work and also the narrative with the music. So just kind of been developing it over the years. When they were at McCall Center, we did kind of a small performance over there. And then back in February, we did one at the old African American Cultural Center.
What are the issues that are important to you in your work?
Justice, love, redemption. I think those are kind of common threads through all of the work that I've done over the years.
Q, I found a poem of yours.
Oh, Lord.
And it's about an issue that we're facing in our world today.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you might read it.
Oh, yeah. So this is a poem by myself, and it's called Wait. This is very disturbing, quite blatant. Let's all just stand around, try to find the evidence, frame the picture, and wait. We have time. Check again. No, not his pulse. Yes, his pockets. He must have something. They always do. Wait. Do nothing. Go ahead, hit record. He's just a petty hustler, an easy target, a repeat offender we recognize to get some more tax dollars. Wait, over his weight limit, so we had to wrestle him down to the ground, cause taking down black bucks gets the heart pumping, and the day started like a cup of joe. After bowels move, them boys in blue like it foul and dark, shedding light on the best part of waking up is black bodies filling this cup till it runneth over. Drink it in, but keep checking. Surround him. Cover up any mistakes as we continue to wait. Wait. Wait for backup, but keep checking. Cast him as lethargic, hear his cries, but there are no rights here that are heard that we are bound to respect. The oldest rule in the system, everyone knows Plessy at the academy and recognizes that he is no man, more beast than anything. That's why we wait. Just poke the Negro and see if he'll magically awake. For in CPR class, they taught us not to touch black lips. I've seen them change like the wind and turn animalistic at any moment. Beware of the trickster's motif. Backup will arrive in just 1 minute. So like justice, let's wait.
Q, how do you feel when you say those words?
Disappointed, over it. You know, this is a conversation we've had for years and years and years, and we're still having the same conversation. So,
are you over it?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely over it. Yeah. You're aware of it, but you try not to let it overwhelm you. It's a delicate balance. But in order to move forward, you kind of have to place it in the back of your mind at times to just keep living life and getting through the day. So, yeah, it's a sense of you're over it in the sense that you don't have that conversation. You just have that conversation with yourself and sometimes not with the world.
The community turns to artists to express feelings that they can't express themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel a responsibility to speak into the world things that folks in your community cannot or do not?
Yes. You know, as a writer, as a poet, you know, in the words of Nina Simone, you're reflecting the times. So, you know, whatever happens in the world, whether directly or indirectly, most times as a writer, you try and put it down.
Q, earlier you talked about the appropriation of art.
Mm-hmm.
On this podcast, I interviewed an artist you may know, Renee Stout. And Renee said all art should be appropriated. That is the very point of art, that art should be cross-cultural, mixed up, mashed up, and that no one owns art once it is expressed, and that all art influences other art. What is your view on the appropriation of art?
I agree with that statement to a certain extent, but just like everything else in America is complicated, and it negates a whole history when, you know, you just say artists for fun and you put it out in the world and everybody can take it. People go overboard with that and claim things. Granted, nothing is new under the sun. Nothing. But when it comes to cultural context and, for lack of a better term, credit of where the work comes from, that's when things start to get tricky. America has a history of taking black folks' work and running with it. It just is what it is. And until black creatives are able to be centered in the conversation and other artists of color, I think it'll continue to be a thin line between love and hate.
Q, you grew up in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Born and raised.
Where in South Carolina?
Greenwood, South Carolina.
What do you remember about your childhood?
My childhood was really cool. I grew up on with my grandma and my mom and my sister. Grandma and my granddad, they were sharecroppers. You know, they ended up buying a bit, acres of land. They were country folk. So I literally grew up in a village. My grandma's house, and then my Uncle Roscoe lived next door. My Aunt Daisy, who I call Lily, she was next door. And then down the street was my Uncle Ernest. Everybody in the neighborhood who I grew up with, the families in the neighborhood, they had been in the neighborhood for years. So they were kind of like my parents too. So, we were in the country, so it wasn't deep in the country, but we were, away from the city. The street is named after my grandma, their last name. So I grew up just in a lovely family because my grandma had 9 children. So I think it's 23 cousins I have, and I'm the youngest grandson. So I was the baby of the family. So the next person in line that's the youngest grandchild would be 5 or 6 years older than me. So I always grew up with just a loving family and people looking after me and wanted the best for me. So it was all love, It was a great family to grow up in.
What did your family teach you?
Respect. That would be the main thing, is respect and love everybody. Have a relationship with God, and those were the 3 biggest things. Of course, education and, all that stuff, but respect and love of people and relationship with God. So those would be the top 3.
Do they show up in your work?
They do. Yeah. They definitely do. It's definitely a reoccurring theme throughout all my work. And then there are actual literal poems about these folks in my lives, like my Aunt Daisy, who I call Lily all my life, because when I was little, they told me once I got older, I was the only person to call her Lily. And that was because when I was little, I couldn't say Daisy. She was always my Lily. But I have a poem about her. She passed away a couple years ago. And it's actually a poem about, the relationship between family and God and the Black church. And then I have a poem about Turner South. They had this campaign, My South, My South Is campaign. And they had different spoken word artists do it. This is probably more than 10 years ago. But I did one for that program. So it's literally talking about my existence as a Southern Black kid growing up.
Quentin, were you always Q?
I was not always Q. I've had many name changes over the years. I always tell people I know who people are by what they call me and what point in my life I met them at, according to what name they call me.
What were some of your former names?
Quint, Q, and Quentin, and Talley. It's according to who calls those names. I know what, whether I was in elementary school or whether it's my mama or whether it's a college friend or whether it's somebody I just met. So
when you're back home for the holidays and you're having a holiday meal,
mm-hmm.
What do they call you at home?
They call me Q now because everybody calls me Q now. So they call me Q, but Quinn will slip out every now and again, but mostly it's Q. Yeah.
Who did you want to be when you were a teenager?
I've always wanted to just be myself and that's not necessarily be like somebody, but there are artists who I, deeply admire and kind of took things from each of them back to the, you kind of steal from every artist that you know, or at least they influence you in some type of way.
But when you were 15, 16, 17, did you think of yourself as a future artist? Is that who you wanted to become?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I've always been in the arts ever since I was little. Literally in the first grade, I was the little gingerbread boy, and my career took off. So I've literally had the bug, the theater bug, and have been acting and, being on stage all of my life. So, in high school, 15 or 16, I produced my first play. It was at a lady from my church. She had a after school program, and they had a big gym, but they actually had a stage with proper lights and all that stuff. So I asked her if I could do a show, and it was based off of the opening Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. So I took that and turned it into some weird abstract thing called Black and Blue. And that was my first thing that I produced and asked the community to come to. And it worked out pretty good, if I say so myself. Having those experiences and that support at an early age kind of defined me as a person, as a creative, and knew that I could do this. I could have a creative life and be a working professional.
You went to Winthrop University.
Yes, I did.
Why Winthrop?
So I'll tell you the story. So I picked 3 colleges, one out of state, HBCU, and one in state. So one of them was in Manhattan. I think at the time it was Manhattan College of the Arts or something like that. But it was just way too expensive. And then I looked at Hampton, which is HBCU, but that was in Virginia and it's private, and that was way too expensive. And then I had never heard of Winthrop, but my cousin, who's a year older than me, she went to Winthrop, and one Sunday she came back home and she was like, "You should consider going to Winthrop. It's a really great school." And I had never heard of Winthrop before. Everybody in my town went to the big, USC or Clemson or College of Charleston. So I was like, I'll go check it out. And what sealed the deal was my cousin, she brought all of her beautiful friends to church one day. And I was like, all of y'all go to Winthrop? I was like, I will be there next semester. But seriously, when I got on campus, I was like, this is a really cool campus. It's small but big enough, big enough. And I went to the theater department, and professors were cool and very open. And I was like, this might be the move. And once you start learning kind of the history of Winthrop and all its number ones in the college rankings, and it was close to a big city, because that was always my thing too. Being from a small town, I wanted to be in a bigger city.
Q, much of college theater are plays like Our Town in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. What was college theater for you, and did it create a space for you to pursue your interests?
Oh yeah, Winthrop was at the time I was there, was very progressive in its ideas. The theater department was very supportive, and actually the first show I was in was the classic 6 Characters in Search of an Author. Mm-hmm. But I know that show because that was my very first one. But we also had The Bridge, which was an organization on campus that was a part of the theater department to get artists of color, because a lot of people didn't major in theater; they were only minors in theater. So I think I was like maybe one of 3 black majors in theater at that time. After all the work I had read, the ones that really, I really connected to were ones by black playwrights. So The Bridge, they usually did a show, but they hadn't done one in a long time. So for my independent study, I asked could I produce a show, and we ended up producing Suzanne Lori Parks' Death of the Last Black Man in the Whole Entire World. And it turned out great. It was sold out every night. I just knew that there was a lane for Black theater, just in general, but specifically at the school at that time. So I did that show and then did Day of Absence the next year, and then I graduated.
In 2004, you moved to Charlotte after graduating from Winthrop. How did you go about establishing yourself as a working artist?
So before then, around 2001, I had started coming to Charlotte because I was into poetry. I was actually working at Enterprise off of Nations Ford Road, and across the street was a barbershop. And I see this cat walking every day. And, you know, we ended up talking, and he introduced me to pretty much all the poets. Shout out to JC, godfather of poetry here in Charlotte. And he was like, why don't you come I'm doing an open mic next week. Why don't you come do something? So that's kind of how I got connected with all the poets here in town. And through that, fast forward to 2004, I was working with Jessica Deltac. She was doing the poetry thing at that time, and she was resident artist for Crossroads Charlotte, which had just started. You know, I had done Crossroads Charlotte a couple times. She was leaving to go to LA, and she asked me to take over her position. And that's literally how I got my creative start in Charlotte, was through poetry and learning the other part of Charlotte, the corporate world, through Crossroads Charlotte. So by the time I actually graduated, the support system was already built in.
Q, your resume shows that you've received many grants and fellowships and awards and honors. What is your view of the support and recognition that you've received in Charlotte?
I'm grateful for any and all support, first of all. You know, it's hard work. I'm just glad somebody noticed at the end of the day. Thank you for listening. You know, because it could be a thing of, you know, nobody likes your work, and that's a thing, you know. So, you know, I'm grateful for all the support and all the accolades and the articles and all that stuff. So I don't expect them. I actually feel kind of weird about them sometimes.
Why do you feel kind of weird about them?
Because I think there are other creatives who work just as hard who don't get enough shine in Charlotte. It's so many. I always tell people it's so many talented creatives in Charlotte. It is crazy. For this being a medium-sized city, there's a plethora of, and I don't say this lightly, like literally world-class folk who could literally be anywhere other than Charlotte. And I think Charlotte takes that for granted at times.
But there are two or three artists whose names always come up, who have seemed to have broken through that establishment. Charlotte knows who they are and is willing to support them. Mm-hmm. And you're one of those. Everyone knows Q. So is this a good thing? It's good for Q, but how does that sit with your fellow artists, do you think, that you're getting the shine?
That's a good question. I think they support me. Hopefully they're not talking behind my back. But they do, I'll say this, they do support me because, you know, a lot of folks, they could work with anybody. They could be on the road or work with any other theater company in town. But when I reach out, if they're not doing something else, most of the time they'll say yes. And I try and take people along with me for the ride because, like I said, I'm not the most talented in the bunch. And actually, I'm more fans of their work than they may be of mine. Most of the time, you know, when I find a new talent or whatever, I'm actually a fan of that person's work. So, yeah.
Do you think a community has an obligation to support the work of artists?
Yes. Give us all your money. And not just money, but I kid. But seriously, not just financially, but, whether you're volunteering, you might be a working professional and you just love the arts. Go to that person or that organization and say, how can I help? I want to volunteer and do something. I guarantee you they will find something for you to do, especially if it's an organization. So that's one thing. The other thing is sometimes I feel like there's a artist-audience disconnect. And sometimes as an artist, you literally just want people in the seats and come out to the venues and not necessarily always make a donation of $500 or $1,000. I literally just want you to come out at 8:00 and pay $5 to come see this show because I need to feel your energy. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's literally as simple as that. Or I want you to come to this gallery. I don't even want you to buy a painting. I just want you to come and tell your friends. That's support. And I think sometimes that doesn't relate, audience to artist-wise, yeah.
Q, you could be in New York or Los Angeles. You could be testing your talents in larger markets. Why are you here in Charlotte?
I love Charlotte. It's where, I got my professional start and have grown as an artist. And I think it's a good hub, we live in such a global society. You can do work in New York for 6 weeks and always come back to Charlotte. Like, that's not a thing. People do it all the time. But Charlotte's a cool hub to come back to. And in my opinion, Charlotte has some of the toughest audiences. They let you know real quick whether they like your work or whether they don't like your work. Like, it's not an in-between thing with Charlotte audiences. They don't sugarcoat it. So
that's interesting because most people would say Charlotte is polite and doesn't necessarily say what's on its mind. So you're saying something else. You're saying that the audiences will tell you.
Yeah. Especially this is specifically from a poetry, music, and theater standpoint, but specifically in poetry and music, because you kind of get that feedback automatically after this song. We have some of the toughest audiences. You have to impress them, and if they're not impressed or you don't connect with them in a certain way, it's not happening. Yeah, that's why sometimes it's getting better now, but you used to have a lot of artists skip over Charlotte, playing Greensboro, playing, Durham or Columbia, because we just had a tough audience, a tough market to kind of break through.
What's next for you, Q?
I don't know, but I know it'll be interesting. Is this a life question or a project question? Because if it's a life question, I just don't know. But if it's a project question, the next thing will be Intergalactic. So I'll say this, Broadway, off-Broadway has always been on my mind for a minute. And I think we have the show to do one of those or both of those. So that's kind of my focus right now. And it's just a lot of work and a lot of planning and a lot of moving parts. So, yeah.
When you look back on your work one day, what do you want it to be about?
Back to the mission statement, personal artist mission statement, is being unapologetically human from a Black perspective in America.
Thank you for your time today, Q.
Cool. No problem, man.
Quentin Talley is founder and artistic director of OnQ Performing Arts. He earned a BA in theater performance from Winthrop University. And now, a personal word. The other day after class, a student came up to me and said my lecture was dope. That was the best compliment ever. I asked my student why he thought my lecture was dope. He said, "It was real, Professor. You weren't faking it. I could feel you." That's how I feel about Quentin Talley. I've watched him recite poetry. I've seen him act. I've heard him sing. When he performs, I feel the man. Q's band is called Quentin Talley and the Soul Providers. Here is who I think of when I think of soul music. I think of Etta James and Sam Cooke and Otis Redding. I think of Al Green and Marvin Gaye and Isaac Hayes. I think of Lauryn Hill and Leela James. Soul music calls upon us. It asks something of us. It reminds us to hold on. I live in a town that people complain has no soul. The complaint goes like this. Charlotte is a corporate town. Corporate executives and city officials, in that order, decided that Charlotte needed a competitive advantage. They decided they would invest in arts and culture. They built venues. They raised money. They imported shows and kept the streets clean. Art and culture has been top down ever since. The list of offerings checks all the boxes, but something essential is missing. It feels fake. It feels purchased. It doesn't feel real, the critics say. The people who are not feeling it tell us we need more dirt and grime. The city needs more grit, they say. We need to be more like Detroit, more like New Orleans, more like Nashville and Memphis. More rough edges, more graffiti. That would do it. That would give the city soul. Here is my view. Charlotte doesn't need to do any of that. It doesn't need to pretend to be someplace else. It needs to embrace what it is. Charlotte is a dynamic, youthful, vibrant city, and a clean and functional and beautiful one. All those investments it made in arts and culture is attracting thousands of new residents who are creating every day. As the city strives for significance, as neighborhoods integrate, as people collaborate, the city is finding its voice and expressing more of its soul. Efforts are underway in the city that ask something of us. Transportation networks, social mobility, music everywhere. These efforts and more are enriching our soul. There is one more thing we can do. We can give Quentin Talley his money. We can pay the man. Then ask him to give some of the money to local artists he admires. We can ask those artists to create something. If what they produce is good, we can pay them to create more. If what they produce is not good, we don't need to pretend otherwise. Keeping it real, right down the line. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.